The Secret Fire by Whitaker Ringwald. Chapter 1. Japs. I've always wanted to ride in a limousine. Movie stars get to ride in them all the time, and high school kids rent them for prom. This was a pretty nice one. It had a row of black leather seats that stretched along the windows and wrapped around the back end like the letter J. There was a minibar with crystal glasses and a refrigerator. Last year, our neighbors rented a limo for their daughter, and she and her friends drove down the road with their heads sticking out of the sunroof. They looked like they were having fun. I wanted to do that. I wanted to stick out my head, but then I'd crawl right out onto the roof and make my escape, because this limo ride was the opposite of fun. I'd been hurrying down the steps of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, running as fast as I could, because I was supposed to meet my cousins and this new friend of ours named Pyra. I just finished deactivating the museum's security system so that my cousins could steal an urn. We were supposed to meet at Tyler's car. It's not like I do that sort of thing every day, so I was pretty nervous. I kept looking over my shoulder to make sure no guards were following me. And I didn't hear any police sirens, so that was a good sign. As soon as I got to the car, I was going to check the phone to see if anyone had sent any texts. Ethan gave me his phone to borrow, so I'd have a way to communicate during our heist. But when I neared the end of the steps, there was this crazy man standing there. "Hello, Jacqueline," he said. I skidded to a stop. If he'd been a total stranger, I would have wondered why, on such a hot day, he was wearing a long black coat. But he wasn't a stranger. His name was Ricardo, and I knew why his hand was in his pocket. He was hiding a weapon, not a gun, something way worse. We stared at each other. His eyes were dark and empty. I don't know how to explain it, but it was like looking into a robot's eyes. There was no twinkle, no rage, nothing. And he barely blinked. I was trying to decide if I should start running again when a limousine pulled up to the curb behind him. "Come with me, or you know what will happen," he told me, his expression dead calm. I looked around for Ethan, Tyler, and Pyra. They weren't standing by our car. They weren't hurrying down the steps. That meant they were still inside the museum, still trying to steal the urn. And if this guy found out about the urn, we'd be in huge trouble. He turned away for a moment to open the limo's back door. That gave me just enough time to silence Ethan's phone and tuck it beneath my t-shirt into the waistband of my shorts. I borrowed Ethan's phone because I didn't have one of my own, which is a sore spot for me. What 12-year-old doesn't have a phone? Seriously? Ricardo motioned for me to get into the limo. "What if I don't want to go?" I threatened. "What if I start screaming for help?" "Why would you do such a useless thing?" He patted his pocket. "You know what will happen." I shot darts at him with my glare. I knew without a doubt that another urn was tucked in his pocket. Even though I'd never seen this particular urn in person, I'd heard all about it. It was called the Urn of Faith, and if Ricardo opened it, a magical windstorm would burst out. The wind would be so strong it would break tree branches and knock people over. Cyclists would fly off their bikes, cars would crash, windows would break. Then the magic would reach out like a million cold fingers and yank faith from the souls of anyone who happened to be standing in its path. Losing faith might not sound like a big deal. There are times when we all give up because we're disappointed or because something terrible happened. We might stop believing in ourselves or in a higher power, but that's only a percentage of the faith we carry around with us every single day. Even if we feel we have nothing left, our faith can be reignited. It can grow. It's like the seasons, or like the tide coming and going, moving in and out. But the urn takes every single drop. It sucks the soul totally dry. There's nothing to ignite, nothing to water or fertilize. And once the urn has done its damage, the victim searches desperately for something to believe in. Anything. Anyone. They turn to Ricardo and they put their faith in him. They become his followers, his servants. I wasn't going to let that happen to me, or to Ethan, or Tyler, or our new friend Pyra, or to anyone who had the bad luck to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. So we got into the limo. Never, never, never get into a car with a stranger, Mom always said. But these circumstances were different. I knew this guy sorta. And besides, what else could I do? We hadn't come up with a backup plan. Ricardo got in and sat in the seat across from me. He closed the door. Then the limo started to move. I took a sharp breath. Had I made the wrong decision? I couldn't see the driver because of a tinted plate of glass that separated the front seat from the back of the limo. To my surprise, we didn't drive very far. In fact, we drove into the art museum's parking lot and sat, idling. I narrowed my eyes. What was he waiting for? Was he going to try to capture my cousins too? I had to warn them. I pressed my fingers against the window. Ethan and Tyler still hadn't come out of the museum, nor had Pyra. I glanced at Ricardo's pocket. As far as I knew, there were three magical urns: the urn of faith, the urn of love, and the urn of hope. I'd only seen the urn of hope. I'd carried it around. I'd even slept with it in my hotel bed. For a while, I'd been its protector. I remember how warm it had felt in my hands, like a living creature. I'd been able to sense when it was nearby. I could hear it calling me. But as I sat in the limo, I didn't sense the urn of faith. That didn't surprise me. I'd never acted as its protector, so I guess we had no bond. But as Ricardo settled into his seat, his pocket suddenly looked flat, too flat to be holding anything. Wait a minute, I said, let me see the urn. Ricardo took off his fedora and set it on his lap. He tucked his long black hair behind his ears, then looked at me with a blank expression. How can I show it to you? It is not here. What? I cried. Did you think I carried it with me at all times? He shook his head with disgust. A weapon of such magnificence should always be kept in a safe place, and brought out only when needed. He tricked me. I felt so stupid. I should have demanded to see it when we were on the museum steps. I punched the door button, the window buttons. Nothing opened. Did this limo have child protection locks? I always hated those things. I pounded my feet on the floor, yelling at the driver, Hey, there's a kidnapped girl back here. I pounded my fists on the window. Help! Help! People walked down the sidewalk, but no one turned and looked at the limo. Had it been soundproofed? I thought about the phone still hidden in my waistband. It was too risky. If Ricardo saw it, he'd take it away. That phone might be my best chance for escape. Why had I let him trick me? I was furious. Calm down, he told me, his voice as cold as steel. His fingers twitched, as if there was electricity running through them. He pulled a phone from the inner pocket of his coat and made a call. I stopped thrashing and watched, gripping the edge of my seat. Hello, Tyler Hotch. Are you ready to turn over the urn of hope? He'd called my cousin. Don't give it to him, I shouted. Even though the phone was pressed to Ricardo's ear, I could hear Tyler's muffled voice call my name. That is correct, Ricardo replied. Jacqueline is with me. I will keep her unless you are willing to make a trade. Then a girl's voice shot out of the speaker so loud, Ricardo winced. Do not hurt her! Do you hear me, father? Do not injure Jacqueline Malone! Father? For a moment, Ricardo's expression softened. It was as if an icy mask melted away, revealing a real living person. Pyra, is that you? What are you doing in this world? You are forbidden to be here. You are breaking Zeus's law. You are in danger. He actually sounded concerned. This monster, who had unleashed the urn of faith in two different banks and had hurt dozens of people, actually cared about someone? But wait a minute. Ricardo was Pyra's father? I was so shocked I went kind of numb. That meant he was also from the realm of gods. He was immortal. My brain flooded with questions, but I forced myself to sit quietly and listen. On the other end of the call, Pyra pleaded with her father to come home, to help her destroy the urns once and for all. Please, father, stop this madness. Zeus has hope. And his eyes turned cold once again. You returned hope. He held the phone closer. I could no longer hear Pyra, but at that moment Ricardo's eyes flashed as red as flame. The gods never forgive, he hissed. They cannot be trusted. Why would I go back to a world where I have no power, where this world offers me wealth and glory beyond measure? Come to me, my darling daughter, and together we will rebuild the world of the gods in our own image. Together we shall rule the world. Rebuild the world of the gods? I felt like I was watching a movie. The guy was nuts. There was another long pause as he listened to his daughter. Then his gaze rested on my sneakers. Give up your quest, Pyra, and she will not be hurt. He ended the call. She will not be hurt? He was talking about me. I tried not to flinch. I tried to look brave. We sat there for what seemed like forever. A few minutes ago, I'd believed Ricardo was a maniac, but now I knew he was some kind of a moral maniac who wanted to rule the world. How could we possibly stop him? You're wasting your time, I told him. I folded my arms so tightly they started to ache. Pyra will never help you. She knows the urns have to be destroyed. She'll never be on your side. He said nothing. Then he rapped on the driver's window. The limo pulled out of the parking lot, then slowed again. Ricardo reached for the door. My heart skipped a beat. Was he going to let me out? I got ready to bolt, but when the door opened, Pyra slipped into the back seat next to me. I will give up the quest, father, she told him. I will help you. I couldn't believe it. Traitor, I said to her face. Chapter 2. Ethan. Fact. A quest is a search or pursuit made in order to obtain or find something. In movies and books, the main character almost always goes on some sort of quest. I suppose that in those first stories, told by cavemen around the fire, the quest was to hunt and kill a great woolly mammoth. Later, the quest was to rescue a damsel in distress. In one of my favorite stories as a kid, the quest was to protect a giant peach from being destroyed by sharks and cloudmen. But in this story, the one being told right now, the quest is for two brothers from Chatham, New Jersey, to save their cousin and the entire world from a madman. Only this isn't a piece of fiction. This quest is real. Follow that car! I hollered. I couldn't believe those words had come from my mouth. That's one of those phrases you always hear in action films. If I were to star in a film, it would most likely be a documentary about how to check out books from a library, or a comedy about a shy kid who gets nosebleeds. I'm definitely not action hero material. I can't even run a mile without starting to wheeze thanks to my pollen allergy. The car we needed to follow was a black limousine, and it was heading down the street with my cousin Jax held hostage in the back seat. Tyler! I called. Hurry up! Ricardo's getting away! Tyler looked a bit dazed. His hair was uncombed a mess as usual, and his chin was covered in stubble. He didn't want to be here, but Jax and I had begged him to bring us to Boston. We'd needed him for practical reasons. He had a driver's license and a car. But we needed him for other reasons too. He was smart, he was strong, and he was just as involved in this mess as we were. We'd kept the truth about the situation from our parents, and now that Jax was in danger, Tyler and I only had each other. I cringed. We didn't have a reputation for working well together. This whole thing was supposed to be over. I'd wanted to spend the rest of the summer with my feet in our backyard pool, sipping lemonade, or riding my bike, or reading, or doing anything that would be considered sane, rational, and normal. Not worrying about some dangerous Greek artifacts or a crazy guy who wanted to take over the world. Ricardo is Pyra's father, Tyler mumbled. We were standing in the parking lot outside the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And if I looked as dazed as Tyler, I had a good reason. We'd just stolen an urn from the museum's maintenance room. I don't know if this argument would stand up in court, but technically we hadn't stolen it. It was called the Urn of Love, and it had been hidden inside a small statue, which meant that while the statue was listed in the museum's directory, the urn wasn't. The curators knew nothing about it. The urn belonged to my great aunt Juniper. She's the one who'd stuck it inside the statue for safekeeping. but Juniper was lying in a hospital bed, recovering from a stroke, so it had been up to us to get the urn back. Jax disabled the museum's security system, while Tyler and Pyra created a distraction. I went into the maintenance room, opened the statue, and took the urn. Then I managed to sneak it out of the museum. We were a success. No alarms rang, no security guards chased after us, and no police were waiting to arrest us. Except our cousin Jax was supposed to meet us by the car, and then we'd all go back home and everything would be over. Tyler, you need to drive, I cried. I yanked down his sleeve. We need to follow them. I can't believe he's her father. Tyler! He snapped out of it. He jumped into the driver's seat. I jumped into the passenger seat. We slammed the doors. I fastened my seatbelt, then cradled the urn of love between my palms. It radiated, like one of those hand warmers you put into your gloves when you go skiing. Sweat broke out on the back of my neck. Go! I cried as the limousine turned a corner. Jax was disappearing before my eyes, kidnapped by a lunatic. I felt totally helpless. Drive! Tyler fumbled in his jeans. Where's the key? Are you serious? My voice cracked. Oh, found it. He jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. As Tyler backed out of the parking space, he nearly hit a pair of tourists who'd been visiting the museum. Then he put the car into drive and started out of the parking lot. Something made a spluttering noise. The car jolted once, twice. We stopped moving. Drive! I yelled again. Go! I was sounding like a broken record. With each second that passed, Jax was being taken farther and farther away. Why aren't we moving? Tyler turned the key. Nothing happened. Then we both stared at the gas gauge. Empty. No way! Tyler pounded on the steering wheel. Empty? How can it be empty? Why didn't you fill the tank? This was his fault. During this whole trip, I'd been sitting in the back seat navigating. I couldn't even see the gas gauge from the back seat, but he'd been looking right at it. He was to blame. Someone was to blame. Tears stung my eyes. How would we find Jax now? When exactly was I supposed to fill the tank? He began his defense, his eyes narrowing with rage. We were racing to get here, remember? We were trying to get the urn before Ricardo found us. I was driving as fast as I could. I wasn't thinking about gas. He pounded the steering wheel again. Tyler had a wicked temper. He mostly controlled it, but when it flared, it was fierce. He got in trouble a couple times at school. He'd kicked over a desk. He'd thrown a waste paper basket down the hall. Mom said it was immaturity and he'd outgrow it. But he never hurt anyone. He wouldn't do that. He wrenched open the door and flung himself outside. He stomped around the car and then kicked it twice. I took a long, deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. Panic would do us no good. We had to think clearly, logically, and no matter how difficult it was, because we drove each other crazy, we had to work together. Someone started honking. Hey, move your car! Tyler put the car into neutral, and we pushed it into a parking space. I was about to sink back into the seat when I remembered something. She has my phone, I said with a gasp. Yes, that's it. She has my phone. I'd given Jax my phone before we entered the museum. She'd used it to text us, to tell us when the security system had been disabled. I held out my hand. Give me your phone, I'll call her. Are you nuts? You can't call her, Tyler said, his face flushed. That phone is her best chance. If it rings, Ricardo will take it away. Hopefully she's turned it off and hidden it so she can use it later. He pulled his phone from his pocket. But maybe we can trace her. That won't work, I said, my chest deflating. I took off my baseball cap and wiped my forehead with my sleeve. I turned off the GPS, remember? So Ricardo couldn't track us. But maybe she'll turn it back on. Maybe, he shrugged. Who are we kidding? Ricardo kidnapped her. He's not stupid. He'll search for a phone. She won't be able to call, and we won't be able to track her. The sounds of the city moved around us. People talking, cars honking, bus brakes screeching. Though Boston was populated by hundreds of thousands of people, I'd never felt so alone. We have no choice. We have to tell the police, I said. She's in danger. We've already been over this. No police. The urns are too dangerous. We can't let the government get hold of them. Tyler leaned against the car. Then he ran a hand through his hair. I think Jax will be okay. She's not alone. Pyra will take care of her. I wanted to believe that. We'd met Pyra just a few days ago. We didn't know anything about her, except that she was a character from a famous myth, and she lived in the realm of the gods. She'd traveled through a magical portal to come out to our world. It's difficult for me to admit, but all of that is true. What makes you think we can trust Pyra? I asked. She lied to us. She didn't tell us that Ricardo was her father. I trust her. That's because you have a crush on her. He frowned, then his phone buzzed. I pressed close to him so that I could read the screen. The message was from Ricardo. Bring me the urn of hope and the urn of love, and you shall have Jax. Otherwise, you will never see her again. I tried to control the panic that welled in my chest. Never see her? Tyler's phone buzzed again. Both urns or no deal. Tyler stared at the screen. I tried taking a deep breath, but it didn't make me feel less anxious. My nose began to tingle, the sure sign of an imminent nosebleed. Zeus has the urn of hope. How are we supposed to get it? Another text came in. Bring the urns to the Eastern State Penitentiary by 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. What? I screeched. Get both urns by 8 a.m. in the morning? No way, that's impossible. I'm texting back. Tyler's thumbs flew over the keypad. Tell him that Zeus has hope, that it's been destroyed. Tell him we can't get it. Such a move would be strategically ill advised, Tyler grumbled. He wants both urns, and the fact that he wants it is something that's going to keep Jax alive. Then he typed, We need more time. Tyler pressed send, but a not delivered message appeared. He tried to send it again. Brilliant, Tyler grumbled. He's limited our communication, so we can't negotiate or change the parameters of his demands. The Einstein State Penitentiary is all the way in Philadelphia, I said. That's like 5 hours away. I wonder why he wants to meet us at a prison, Tyler asked. It used to be a prison, I said. Now it's a museum. But whether a prison, museum, or hot dog cart, the location didn't matter if we couldn't get the urn of hope. Jax, I whispered, the cousin I'd grown up with, my best friend. I might never see her again. And why 8 a.m.? Tyler wondered. No villain ever sets up a meeting for 8 a.m. It's always midnight or 3 a.m. when it's still dark. Are we going to make the exchange over coffee and donuts? What's the matter with him? Doesn't he ever read comic books? I'll be sure to ask him just before he opens the urn of faith and destroys the world, I said sarcastically. Despite how stressed out I felt, my nose hadn't started bleeding, but a drop of sweat rolled down it. The late afternoon sun was beating on us without mercy. My right hand was sticky with sweat. I opened it. I'd been holding the urn of love this entire time, afraid to let it go. It was small, about the size of a plum, and bright red. If we tell Ricardo the truth that the urn of hope is gone, he has no choice but to settle for this one, I suggested. We'll give it to him. Then he won't hurt Jax. Tyler looked at me, and I could tell he was as scared as I was. This was no ordinary man we were dealing with. He'd robbed some banks. A person had been killed in the process. And now we knew that he'd come from the realm of the gods. He was an immortal, and he had an ominous goal to conquer the world. Our world. We can't give him the urn of love, Tyler said. We can't allow him to hurt anyone else. It has to be destroyed. Do you hear me? Destroyed. He grabbed my shoulder, his grip tight. His eyes were full of determination. There'd be no changing Tyler's mind. He knew the power of the urns. He'd been attacked by hope, and he'd barely survived. We have to destroy all the urns and save Jax. That sounded impossible. Tyler reached into the back seat and grabbed a satchel. It was a leather bag with a golden trident stamped on the side. Pyra left us the key to the portal.
She wants us to return the urn, remember? But I'll travel through the portal and give the urn of love to Zeus so he can destroy it, just as he destroyed Hope. Then I'll ask for Zeus's help. He'll want to punish Ricardo for stealing the urns. I'll make a deal with Zeus. If he helps us get Jax back, I'll tell him where to find Ricardo. Make a deal with Zeus? This was unbelievably crazy, but what other choice did we have? Trying to save my cousin and the world was not a usual day for me. I'm no superhero. I'm just a kid who goes to Chatham Middle School, and my brother is a gaming nerd who wins math competitions. We're supposed to be driving home. Our parents are expecting us. Jax's mom was waiting for her. To make matters worse, I had an allergy appointment on Wednesday, but instead, we were going to travel through a magical portal into another dimension. Tyler found the insurance card in the glove box. Then he called roadside service. Don't worry, he told me. Jax isn't alone. Pyra will protect her. He seemed convinced of Pyra's loyalty, but I wasn't so sure. And that's the end of the chapter.